What's up, bros? The 22-23 NBA season is starting today, and in this video we will talk about investing into basketball cards for the upcoming campaign. Let me start by pointing out that I'm not a certified financial advisor and this is not a formal investment advice. Importantly, given that sports cards are an alternative asset class, not more than 5% of your wealth should be invested into sports cards. What are my qualifications to talk about this topic? Well, I'm a finance professor by my trade and I have consulted extensively asset management firms in North America, Asia and Europe. I have also been collecting sports cards and basketball cards in particular for over 25 years without any interruptions. Overall, the basketball card market is leading the price trend across all sports card markets, and it looks like the most drastic price drop is behind us. Average price levels are likely to decline a little bit more, but for long-term investors now is a pretty reasonable time to invest. In this video, we are going to talk about cards which are available for sale at least a dozen times a year. We are not going to talk about Superstar PMG Greens or 12-13 Prism Superstar Golds and similar cards which will show up for sale after your grandchildren will grow up. Instead, we will focus on investment strategies which can be implemented in a reasonable time frame. Today, we will first talk about investing into active players, then retired players, and finally about some gambling. To avoid any conflict of interest, I disclose that I own some cards I recommend in the investment section of this video, and I do not own any significant cards of players I recommend in the gambling section of the video. Let's start with active players. The key investment principle here is that prices of 99.99% of active players will go down. So you only invest into established generational players. The only active established generational players in the league are LeBron James and Steph Curry. However, right now I would not invest into any of their cards. Their high-end stuff is very expensive. And as I said in the beginning, the price drop is likely to continue for some time. So while percentage-wise it will not be nearly as drastic as what we observed during the past year, dollar-wise it's going to be substantial given high price tags. Second, their low-end stuff is too abundant for meaningful price gains. Third, their mid-end cards are theoretically investable. And today we are talking about basketball, and I should clarify that basketball mid-end would be considered high-end in other sports. So by mid-end cards, I mean cards such as LeBron's Ultimate Rocky Auto or his SPX Rocky Jersey Auto. A very serious problem why I think mid-end cards of these players should be avoided is that a very large portion of these cards is altered/doctored. Unless you are a very experienced collector, you will not be able to tell if that is the case. All these PSA, BGA slaps do not mean anything. There are gazillions of examples of them grading doctored cards. There are obviously some clear red flags, such if the card is a nano-inch smaller than the official size, you shouldn't touch it. But nowadays this is not nearly enough. Don't believe people who will tell you that if the card is in the slab, you are safe. No, once somebody will reveal that your card is doctored, the information travels very fast and you will end up losing a lot of money. Now to retired players. Again, we invest into generational talents and the main player is obviously Michael Jordan. So which cards of Jordan to buy? When talking about any kind of sports card investing, I usually encourage people to buy rookie cards because other stuff is usually just way too plentiful. However, in this case, I will actually discourage you from buying Michael Jordan rookies. And the reason for that is that his low-grade rookies are too abundant, while high-grade rookies are likely to be doctored. Everything I just said about doctored cards applies here. If not a rookie cards, then what? There are two options. First, popular shiny inserts from the 90s. Second, hard-signed patches from the 2000s. Both are good options, but I would personally slightly prefer hard-signed patches from the 2000s because they are somewhat more popular among younger collectors who are the future of the hobby. Examples would be exquisite limited logo. It is critical that you buy one color patches or two color simple structure patches at absolute max, graded BGS 7 to 8. The reason is again to avoid the altered cards. As somebody who has personally opened exquisite and watched tons of exquisite breaks, very few cards there would grade 9 or above. But somehow there are now tons of these cards for sale. A very similar situation with the patches. Most patches were very simple 1-2 color patches. But now you see all these crazy bull-eye patches. Similarly, back then nobody graded these cards with PSA. So if you see a card like that in a PSA slab, it should ring your bell. You can also buy hard-signed auto patches of Jordan paired with LeBron and or Kobe, but do not buy Kobe or LeBron without Jordan. Kobe autos are way too plentiful as he was a super active signer. LeBron autos are of course not nearly as plentiful because he is exclusive to Upper Deck, but there is ample evidence outside of the card market of LeBron being very willing to sell his brand for the right amount of money. So I wouldn't exclude the situation where fanatics would throw a crazy amount of money on him and he would accept. Perhaps not the most likely outcome, but not a zero probability outcome either. This is not the case for Jordan, who has showed multiple times that he will not sell his brand for even a ridiculously high amount of money if he doesn't have a personal relationship with people he is selling it to. And he clearly doesn't have this type of relationship with fanatics. That is for investments, and now to the gambling section. I personally think that the prices of the players I will mention next are more likely to decrease than to increase, but the upside-downside trade-off for them is better than for the vast majority of players. So, which teams are most likely to make a significant step forward this season? Most people would answer something like Memphis or Dallas, but I don't think so. First, when you already performed well, it's more difficult to improve. Second, these teams rely predominantly on young players, and young players are notoriously inconsistent. See, for instance, Atlanta during the past 2 seasons. In my opinion, the team which is most likely to significantly improve its results this season is Cleveland. They narrowly missed the playoffs last season due to highly inconsistent offense, but with the acquisition of Donovan Mitchell, this should not be an issue anymore and they should comfortably make the playoffs. So which are investable Cavaliers players? The main source of the short-term price appreciation in the basketball hobby are improved offensive stats. This automatically excludes critically important players such as, for example, Jared Allen, because they are missing layups and have been missing them for years. The most offensively oriented players on Cavaliers are Mitchell and Garland. Mitchell is a great player, but at the same time, his high level of skill means that it's more difficult for him to improve even further, and his past level of success means that Cleveland needs to get at leads to the second round of playoffs and more like conference final for his prices to significantly increase. Given the overall inexperience of the Cleveland's roster, this is not likely. Garland is a very, very skilled offensive player, but as we saw last season, he is also a very inconsistent player. His offensive performance will fluctuate a lot, and so will his card prices. I think the Cleveland player who is most likely to improve offensively this season is Evan Mobley. He's a great two-way player who showed the ability to consistently improve during his rookie season. During his rookie season, he mostly concentrated on improving his defensive game, which is now very good, so I now expect him to concentrate more on his offensive skills, which are great but unpolished. It is clear that Evan Mobley will be playing a lot this season because he's like the only two-way player on Cavaliers roster without major health problems. I also expect him to do best in games against stronger opponents, which will attract more attention because these better teams will concentrate on guarding Mitchell and Garland with competent defenders, and Mobley will get a lot of easier balls from them as the third offensive option often on the court. At the same time, Mobley is also a relatively cheap player card-wise, and his cards have a relatively high floor compared to current valuations due to his defensive skills, which in basketball are much less volatile than offensive skills. Which are Mobley cards to buy? Well, I would go with some liquid lower end cards because it's still a gamble. However, not the lowest end cards, as it's difficult to make profits of them with all the buying and selling fees. So something like higher numbered prisms, maybe even prism silvers would be good options. Another type of an educated gamble you can take is a non-hyped rook from a top team, which will come out of nowhere and scores a lot of points. This works because top teams are followed by a lot of people, and so when something unexpected happens, such as a non-hyped rook performing well offensively, this usually has an immediate impact on card prices. The very obvious problem with this strategy is that, of course, top teams seldom have good non-hyped rooks because they draft late and good players are usually hyped. However, this year we have such a rook in Patrick Baldwin Jr. of Golden State Warriors. He was a top prospect in high school, had offers from many top colleges, but went to play for a second-tier college because his dad was a coach there. Then he got injured early and then declared himself for the draft, where he was drafted very late first round. At the same time, he played very, very competent basketball in college and had an exceptionally impressive summer league. Of course, he is at the very bottom of the GSW rotation and might even play in Santa Cruz, but at the same time, Warriors is a very fragile team which is likely to have a long season, and so he is likely to get a chance at some point. And given what he has shown, he is very likely to take an advantage of this chance. Of course, there are tons of question marks about his long-term future. The health is the most obvious one, but also, for example, his ability to adjust his defensive game. However, we are not thinking about any long-term investments here. This is a gambling section, so the idea is to pick up dirt cheap numbered cards from early season products such as Donruss Hoops when Patrick Baldwin Jr. is not playing, and then sell them later when he will have a couple of productive games.